Welcome back to Cyberspace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston. And in today's episode, we're diving deep into the psychology of mass delusion. We'll explore how extremist groups, including organizations centered around xenophobia and eugenics, extremist religious movements, authoritarian political entities, and even certain extremist think tanks manipulate collective beliefs to enforce their agendas. Using both historical insights and more modern examples, we'll uncover the mechanisms that drive mass delusion and its impact on society. First, a bit of historical context. Mass delusion isn't a new phenomenon. From the witch hunts of the medieval period to the Red Scare in the mid-20th century America, societies have often been swayed by fear and misinformation. In the early 20th century, Edward Bernays, known as the father of public relations, outlined the potential for engineering consent through media and propaganda, shaping public opinion to align with specific agendas. Bernays' work on the manipulation of public opinion laid the groundwork for many of the worst propaganda tactics we see today. These historical psychological tactics have evolved and are currently being applied by various groups. For instance, the Heritage Foundation, a think tank most recently in the news for authoring a blueprint for authoritarian rule titled Project 2025, has been instrumental in strategically influencing public policy and opinion on issues ranging from climate change denial to restrictive immigration policies, using sophisticated media strategies to psychologically influence societal views. The study of mass delusion has deep roots in social psychology. Le Bon's seminal work, The Crowd, a study of the popular mind, laid the foundation for understanding group psychology and the susceptibility of crowds to manipulation. Le Bon argued that individuals in a crowd can lose their sense of individual identity and responsibility, becoming more susceptible to suggestion and emotional contagion. This concept has been essential in understanding how extremist groups and cults can sway large numbers of people. Building on Le Bon's work, Irving Janis introduced the concept of groupthink in the 70s. Janis's research, published in his book Victims of Groupthink, explored how groups can make irrational or immoral decisions when there's a strong desire for harmony or conformity. This phenomenon is particularly relevant when examining the decision-making processes within extremist organizations and cults, where dissenting voices are often silenced or expelled. To further illustrate the historical context of mass delusion, let's examine two fascinating cases: the Dancing Plague of 1518 and the Salem witch trials. The Dancing Plague, which occurred in Strasbourg, France, saw hundreds of people dancing uncontrollably for days or even months. This bizarre event, studied by historian John Waller, demonstrates how stress, religious fervor, and superstition can combine to create mass psychogenic illness. The Salem witch trials of 1692 to 1693 provide another stark example of mass delusion, this time with deadly consequences. This event, analyzed extensively by historians like Mary Beth Norton, shows how a combination of religious extremism, social tensions, misogyny, and political opportunism can lead to widespread panic and the persecution of innocent individuals. These historical examples remind us that mass delusions are not just a modern phenomenon, but have deep roots in human society and psychology. But what are some of the psychological mechanisms behind mass delusion? At the heart of mass delusion lies a complex interaction of psychological principles like conformity, persuasion, and cognitive bias. These mechanisms are manipulated to create and spread beliefs that have little basis in reality, but serve the purposes of those in power. Researcher Robert Cialdini has extensively studied the science of persuasion, identifying key principles that influence people's decisions and beliefs. His work helps us understand how these tactics are employed in mass delusion scenarios. Studies have shown that individuals are more susceptible to believing false information when it confirms their pre-existing prejudices. This confirmation bias is a critical tool in the arsenal of those looking to engineer consent or dissent. Joseph Pierre's research on conspiracy theories provides valuable insights into how these biases contribute to the spread of misinformation. Far-right groups and hate organizations often exploit the innate human fear of other and the need for belonging to foster a sense of unity and purpose among their members. For example, evangelical movements like Quiverful create insular communities that heavily rely on group conformity, enforcing strict role expectations and discouraging dissent. The concept of cognitive dissonance, first introduced by Leon Festinger in his book A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance, plays an important role in understanding how individuals maintain beliefs in the face of contradictory evidence. Festinger's research, including his famous study of a doomsday cult published in When Prophecy Fails, demonstrated how people often double down on their beliefs when faced with disconfirming evidence. This psychological mechanism helps explain why members of extremist groups or cults can maintain their convictions even when confronted with reality that challenges their worldview. Recent research by Ecker et al. In their paper, The Psychological Drivers of Misinformation Belief and Its Resistance to Correction, provides further insights into why people believe and spread misinformation. They identify key factors such as partisanship, cognitive style, and worldview as significant predictors of susceptibility to misinformation. Their work also highlights the importance of epistemic beliefs, how people think about knowledge and its acquisition, in determining one's vulnerability to false information. This research is particularly relevant when examining how extremist groups and think tanks can successfully propagate their ideologies despite contrary evidence. It's also vital to understand other cognitive biases that contribute to mass delusion. The availability heuristic, studied by Swirsky and Kahneman, shows how people tend to overestimate the likelihood of events that are easily recalled, often because they are dramatic or heavily publicized. This bias can lead people to believe that rare events, like terrorist attacks, are much more common than they actually are, fueling fear and paranoia. The Dunning-Kruger effect, named after psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, describes how individuals with limited knowledge or expertise in a given domain tend to overestimate their abilities. This cognitive bias can contribute to the spread of misinformation, as people who lack a deep understanding of complex issues may confidently spread oversimplified or incorrect information. Are there more modern examples of mass delusion? Certainly. In the digital age, misinformation can spread faster than ever, and modern media platforms have become battlegrounds for psychological warfare. Social media algorithms may inadvertently prioritize sensationalist content, creating echo chambers that reinforce divisive narratives and foster a polarized political landscape. I'll discuss specific cases where mass delusion has led to real-world actions, such as violent protests or attacks. A poignant example is how certain extremist religious groups have politicized public health measures during the pandemic, framing them as attacks on personal freedom rather than necessary public health measures, harming the public's ability to prevent the spread of disease. Researchers Robert Bartholomew and Simon Wesley have studied the protean nature of mass sociogenic illness, which provides valuable context for understanding how collective beliefs can manifest in physical symptoms and behaviors. The rise of QAnon provided a contemporary example of how mass delusion can spread rapidly in the digital age. Researcher Marc-Andre Argentino's work on QAnon, published in The Church of QAnon, Will Conspiracy Theories Form the Basis of a New Religious Movement?, explores how this conspiracy theory took on quasi-religious characteristics. Argentino's research highlights how digital platforms have accelerated the spread of fringe beliefs, allowing them to reach mainstream audiences and even influence political discourse. The Pizzagate conspiracy theory offered another striking example of how online mass delusion can have real-world consequences. A study by Smallman titled Conspiracy Theories and the Zika Virus drew parallels between Pizzagate and other conspiracy theories, demonstrating how these beliefs can lead to dangerous actions. The incident where an armed man entered a Washington, D.C. pizzeria based only on this conspiracy theory is a stark example of the potential for online mass delusion to manifest in offline violence. More recent examples of mass delusion include the spread of COVID-19 misinformation and election fraud conspiracies. The COVID-19 pandemic has been accompanied by what the World Health Organization termed an infodemic, a flood of false and misleading information about the virus, its origins, and its potential treatments. Research by Brennan et al. Found that while much COVID-19 misinformation reconfigures existing conspiracy theories, some of it actively politicized the pandemic, leading to real-world consequences like vaccine hesitancy and a resistance to public health measures. The persistence of election fraud conspiracies following the 2020 U.S. presidential election provides another troubling example of modern mass delusion. Despite numerous court rulings and official recounts confirming the election results, a significant portion of the population continues to believe in widespread fraud years later. This belief has led to real-world consequences, including the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol and the so far unchallenged slow judicial coup the U.S. is experiencing now. Studies by Yusinki et al. Have shown how these beliefs are often rooted in pre-existing political attitudes and distrust in institutions, highlighting the complex interplay between individual psychology and broader societal factors in the spread of mass delusion. What about the psychology of cult recruitment and indoctrination? To understand mass delusion fully, we must examine the specific tactics used by cults and extremist groups to recruit and maintain members. One of the most comprehensive frameworks for understanding these tactics is the BITE model, developed by Dr. Stephen Hassan, a fellow Fielding alum and leading expert on cults and coercive control. The BITE model stands for Behavior, Information, Thought, and Emotional Control. Hassan argued that cults and extremist groups use these four types of control to manipulate their members. First, behavior control, regulating an individual's physical reality, including where, how, and with whom they spend their time. Second, information control, managing the information a person receives, often through deception and limiting access to non-cult sources. Third, thought control, indoctrinating members to internalize the group's doctrine as truth, while labeling alternative beliefs as illegitimate. And fourth, emotional control, manipulating a person's feelings through guilt, fear, and indoctrination of phobias. One of the most powerful recruitment techniques used by cults is known as love bombing. This involves overwhelming potential recruits with affection, attention, and praise to create a sense of belonging and acceptance. Margaret Singer, a clinical psychologist and expert on cults, described love bombing as a coordinated effort to produce a sense of intense connection and loyalty. Isolation is another key tactic used by cults to maintain control over their members. By cutting individuals off from their previous social networks, their families, and sources of information, cults can more easily shape their members' reality. This isolation can be physical, such as moving to a compound, or social and emotional, by convincing members that only fellow cult members can be trusted. To illustrate these concepts, let's look at two infamous cult case studies. First, let's look at Heaven's Gate. This UFO religion, led by Marshall Applewhite, culminated in a mass suicide of 39 members in 1997. The group used a mix of Christian and New Age beliefs, combined with strict behavioral control and isolation, to convince members that suicide was necessary to reach an alien spacecraft. Aum Shinrikyo, this Japanese doomsday cult, was responsible for the 1995 Tokyo subway sarin attack. It showcased how apocalyptic beliefs can be weaponized. The group's leader, Shoko Asahara, used a combination of Buddhist and Hindu teachings, mind control techniques, and isolation to create a highly devoted following capable of extreme violence. These case studies demonstrate the power of cult tactics and the potential dangers of mass delusion when taken to extremes. Understanding these mechanisms is vital for developing effective strategies to prevent and counter such harmful group dynamics. What role does media and propaganda play in this? Media plays a pivotal role in either curbing or facilitating mass delusion. Let's analyze how different media outlets and social platforms contribute to the spread of delusional beliefs and discuss the ethical responsibilities of these platforms. Recent work by Gordon Pennycook and David Rand has shown how attaching warnings to some fake news stories can increase the perceived accuracy of stories without warnings, highlighting the complex relationship between media interventions and belief formation. Strategies employed by propagandists to craft messages that resonate deeply with certain demographics often facilitate the spread of their ideologies. These strategies are designed to exploit psychological vulnerabilities. We'll look into what can be done to counteract them momentarily. Shi-Sun Lao's research on public perception of mass media usage and its impact on behavior offers insight into how media consumption shapes our attitudes and actions. Additionally, Ernest Isogo and Mercy Mingpingajira's work on the social and psychological effects of social media provides a framework for understanding how these platforms influence contemporary digital consumers. The concept of echo chambers in social media has been extensively studied by researchers like Axel Browns. In social media has been extensively studied by researchers like Axel Bruns. In his paper Filter Bubble and Echo Chamber, Debunking the Myths of Online User Behavior, Bruns challenges some common assumptions about echo chambers while still acknowledging their impact. His work suggests that while perfect echo chambers are rare, partial echo chambers do exist and can contribute to the polarization of beliefs and the spread of misinformation. The role of algorithms in shaping online information consumption cannot be overstated. A study by Bakshi, Messing, and Adamek titled Exposure to Ideologically Diverse News and Opinion on Facebook found that while individual choices play a significant role in determining exposure to cross-cutting content, the algorithm also has a substantial impact. This research underscores the complex interplay between user behavior and platform design in creating environments conducive to the spread of mass delusions. We can see a current 2024 example of this algorithmic impact across Meta's three main platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, as they openly suppress information about what is happening on the ground in Gaza and other political current events during a fraught election season in the United States. Facebook exec Mosseri has been quite public in discussing that this suppression is intentional, despite its detrimental effect on the public. This isn't a new tactic. Social media platforms use complex algorithms to determine what content users see. These algorithms often prioritize engagement over accuracy, which can lead to the amplification of sensationalist or extreme content. A study by Bafuji, Roy, and Arol found that false news spreads more rapidly on Twitter than true news does. The researchers attributed this to the novelty and emotional reactions that false news often generates. Since their study, Twitter was purchased by Elon Musk and renamed X. Musk has been open about the changes he has made to the algorithm that amplify extreme content over more accurate news sources, speaking about it frequently on his own X account, and often amplifying conspiracy theories by resharing them himself. Activity like that of Musk and Mosseri are examples of the human component in the concept of computational propaganda, studied by researchers like Philip Howard and Samantha Bradshaw. It refers to the use of algorithms, automation, and human curation to purposely distribute misleading information over social media networks. Their work has shown how state and non-state actors will use these techniques to manipulate public opinion on a large scale. How do we combat mass delusion? It can seem overwhelming, so let's look at some strategies for individuals and societies to recognize and resist these psychologically manipulative tactics. The importance of critical thinking, media literacy, and the cultivation of a questioning mindset are fundamental tools to defend against psychological manipulation. There are initiatives and movements dedicated to educating the public about the dangers of mass delusion and the importance of basing beliefs and actions on verified information. You just have to keep your eyes and mind open and find them. I will put a list of some of them in the blog post that accompanies this episode. Elizabeth Palak and Laurel Ball's experimental research on how media influences social norms offers valuable insight into potential strategies for countering mass delusion through media intervention. It's also worth reading the work of Susan Paxton and her colleagues. They have studied the effects of different types of social media content on body dissatisfaction. And while that's not directly related to mass delusion, their research illustrates how media can shape perceptions and beliefs in powerful ways, which will help you arm yourself against it. Recent research by Ruzenbeek and van der Linden introduces the concept of inoculation against misinformation. Their study, Fake News Game Confers Psychological Resistance Against Online Misinformation, demonstrated how exposing people to weakened forms of misinformation can build resistance to future attempts at deception. This approach, inspired by inoculation theory in psychology, offers a promising avenue for developing interventions to combat mass delusion. Education plays a pivotal role in countering mass delusion. There's a reason authoritarian regimes and cults attack educational systems and try to frame educated people as the other and encourage people to think of them as an outgroup. A study by Guess et al. Titled A Digital Media Literacy Intervention Increases Discernment Between Mainstream and False News in the United States and India showed that Even brief educational digital literacy interventions can improve people's ability to distinguish between reliable and unreliable news sources. This research underscores the importance of incorporating media literacy education into broader efforts to combat the spread of mass delusion. On a practical level, individuals can take several steps to protect themselves from manipulation and mass delusion. First of all, you need to diversify your information sources. Relying on a variety of reputable news outlets can help balance potential biases and provide a more comprehensive view of events. Practicing critical thinking, questioning claims, looking for evidence, and considering alternative explanations before accepting information as true is vital. Consider not just who is sharing the information, but who is paying for it, if it's true, who would gain from the information's acceptance, and when and where it's being shared. This also helps you discern when a formally reputable news outlet, like the New York Times, for example, might start sharing news that can't be trusted, perhaps after a change in editorial staff or other event. Be aware of your own biases as well. Recognizing that everyone has cognitive biases and actively trying to challenge your own preconceptions is essential in the fight against misinformation. Use fact-checking resources. Websites like factcheck.org and PolitiFact can help verify claims and debunk misinformation. However, they are not immune to bias themselves. They are programmed by humans after all. So find multiple fact-check sources you trust and check against all of them. Engage in respectful dialogue. Now, this is somewhat problematic. If you go back to our politeness protocol episode, you'll see why. But there are ways where you can discuss ideas with people who hold different views and focus on understanding rather than convincing to navigate your way through tough conversations and reach accord and understand what's true and what's not. Help each other fight mass delusion. Support quality local journalism. Into reputable local news sources to support thorough, fact-based reporting. Take breaks from social media. Regular disconnection can help reduce exposure to potential misinformation and alleviate some of the psychological pressures that social media can create. The importance of understanding the psychology behind mass delusion as a means to protect our societies from divisive and destructive influences can't be overstated. By staying informed and vigilant, we can hope to build a society that values truth and unity over division and deceit. The study of mass delusion is not just an academic exercise. It's a tool for maintaining the health of our democracies and societies. As we've explored throughout this episode, the mechanisms behind mass delusion are complex and deeply rooted in human psychology. From the historical examples of witch hunts to modern-day conspiracy theories like QAnon, we've seen how these phenomena can have real and sometimes dangerous consequences. However, our exploration has also revealed reason for hope. The growing body of research on misinformation, echo chambers, and digital literacy provides us with tools to combat mass delusion. By understanding the psychological principles at play, we can develop more effective strategies for education and intervention. By fostering critical thinking skills and promoting media literacy, we can build more resilient communities that are less susceptible to manipulation. As we move forward in an increasingly complex information landscape, we must remain vigilant and continue to question our own beliefs and sources of information. By doing so, we not only protect ourselves from falling prey to mass delusions, but also contribute to a more informed and rational public discourse. I want to leave everyone with a call to action. The fight against mass delusion isn't just the responsibility of researchers, educators, or policymakers. It's something we all need to engage in. Here are some practical steps you can take. Practice and promote critical thinking in your daily life. When you encounter a claim, especially one that aligns with your existing beliefs, take a moment to question it. Where is the evidence? What are the counterarguments? Think it through. Share what you've learned about mass delusion with friends and family. Awareness is the first step in prevention. Support initiatives that promote media literacy and critical thinking skills in schools and communities. When you see misinformation online, don't just scroll past it. Take the extra time to report it, or, if appropriate, engage in respectful dialogue to provide accurate information. Regularly challenge your own beliefs. Seek out diverse perspectives and be open to changing your mind when presented with new evidence. being able to change your mind is a sign of strength. Remember, combating mass delusion isn't about winning arguments or proving others wrong. It's about fostering a society where truth and evidence are valued, where diverse perspectives are respected, and where we can have meaningful dialogues even when we disagree. As we conclude this episode, I hope you've gained insights into the complex world of mass delusion and feel empowered to navigate our information-rich world more critically. The challenges we face are significant, but so is our capacity for reason, empathy, and collective action. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the shadows of mass delusion. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, and this has been an episode of PsyberSpace. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and stay curious.